LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the March 11th edition of LiberalViewer Monday Media Mixup. Thanks for joining me. I'll be using the dozen best, most newsworthy clips I picked out from the Sunday morning news analysis shows, plus from Saturday Night Live, and a brief clip of the State of the Union response from Senator Katie Britt. But most of my clips, well, all the clips really come from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States. And I will be adding my media criticism and political commentary for what should be an educational, informative, fair use program. I said media criticism and political commentary. I got myself mixed up there because I wanted to make sure that you knew I was taking clips from Saturday Night Live and from the State of the Union response by Senator Katie Britt. And actually, if you look down in the video description, you can see short summaries of all 12 clips I'm using. And you can see my topic. The Biden versus Trump 2024 campaign begins with the Biden State of the Union speech. And of course, Nikki Haley dropping out last Wednesday. And so we got the rematch that nobody really wanted, but that's one. You'll see the topic in the news summaries. But for my political comedy, I mean, I could probably just show you a clip of Senator Katie Britt of Alabama doing this really weird State of the Union response, and I actually will show you a clip from that. But first, I'm going to show you how Scarlett Johansson tried to do a parody of Katie Britt in the cold open of Saturday Night Live last Saturday over here.
Good evening, America. My name is Katie Britt, and I have the honor of serving the great people of Alabama. But tonight, I'll be auditioning for the part of Scary Mom. And I'll be performing an original monologue called This Country is Hell. You see, I'm not just a senator. I'm a wife, a mother, and the craziest bitch in the Target parking lot. First and foremost, I'm a mom. And like any mom, I'm going to do a pivot out of nowhere into a shockingly violent story about sex trafficking. And rest assured, every detail about it is real, except the year, where it took place, and who was president when it happened.
And actually, if you want to see the whole parody, down in the links I put under sources is a link to the full Saturday Night Live cold open, including the parody of Joe Biden's fiery speech at the beginning, and then they go to Katie Britt. It's actually worth watching the whole thing, and I actually really enjoyed Scarlett Johansson finding ways to parody something that was so strange to begin with, but I think she found some of the quirks. And she also did that fact check there. Scarlett Johansson's parody did a better job of fact checking what Senator Katie Britt said about this terrible incident of human trafficking that she recounted this story. I'm actually going to show you what she said, but I'm going to first show you how Scarlett Johansson did a better job doing fact checking than Fox News Sunday did. Shannon Bream had Katie Britt on and brought up this criticism, from the New York Times. That's how Shannon Bream broached the subject. Well, the New York Times is criticizing you for supposedly implying that this terrible human trafficking story took place during the Biden administration. And then Katie Britt, you're about to see, she denies the whole thing, doesn't talk about the place that it happened, because she definitely made it sound like it happened in the United States, not in Mexico, and who was president. That the year and who was president, they kind of talk about, and Katie Britt just says, "Oh, she didn't mean that." That was the question Shannon Bream asked. Well, is that what you meant? And there's no follow up. She moves on to another topic when Katie Britt denies the whole thing, does not play the clip from her speech that totally refutes the bogus denial she gives to Shannon Bream. You'd think they would have played the clip. So I'm going to show you her bogus denial and Shannon Bream's really terrible cross-examination. Then I'm going to show you what Katie Britt actually said. So here's the Fox News Sunday supposed cross-examination and the softball interview from yesterday that we can watch together over here.
Let's talk about your response to the State of the Union address, which has gotten a lot of headlines. One of the fans was former President Trump. He loved it. He said it was compassionate and caring. But you've had a lot of critics out there, and I want to talk about specifically one anecdote that I've heard you tell before. It is a horrific story of a sex trafficking survivor. Nobody is questioning that this story happened, that she is actually who she is, says she is, and that this happened. The question is about the timing and the implication of you telling the story. The New York Times has this. Right. None of this happened during President Biden's administration, but that didn't stop the first-term senator from strongly implying that the president could have somehow prevented it from happening, using rhetoric that seemed calibrated to inflame public fears about immigration. Did you mean to give the impression that this horrible story happened on President Biden's watch?
No, Shannon, look, I very specifically said this is what President Biden did during his first 100 days. Minutes after coming into office, he stopped all deportations, he halted construction of the border wall, and he said, I am going to give amnesty to millions. Those types of things act as a magnet to have more and more people here. I then said in his first 100 days, he had 94 executive actions. And those executive actions didn't just create the crisis, they invited it. I then contrasted it with my first 100 days. Shannon, I went to the border 3 times in my first 100 days in office. And when I was there, I asked for the real, unvarnished truth. I wanted to sit down. I asked the Border Patrol agents. I asked the people there. I asked the victims, previous victims of drug cartels, tell me what it's like, tell me what we need to do, tell me what we need to know. The truth is, and the media knows this, yet they're not covering it, that human trafficking has gone up under President Biden. If you look back onto 2018, it was a $500 million industry, human trafficking by the drug cartels. It is now a $13 billion industry. Shannon, under the drug cartels are winning under this. This is a story of what is happening now at an astronomical rate. And we have to bring attention to it. We have to tell those stories. And the liberal media needs to pay attention to it because there are victims all the way coming to the border. There are victims at the border, and then there are victims all throughout our country. And to me, it is disgusting to try to silence the voice of telling the story of what it is like to be sex trafficked when we know that that is one of the things that the drug cartels are profiting most off of.
Okay, but to be clear, the story that you relayed is not something that's happened under the Biden administration, that particular person.
Well, I very clearly said I spoke to a woman who told me about when she was trafficked when she was 12. So I didn't say a teenager. I didn't say a young woman, a grown woman, a woman when she was trafficked when she was 12. And so listening to her story, she is a victim's right advocate who is telling this is what drug cartels are doing. This is how they're profiting off of women. And it is disgusting. And so I am hopeful that it brings some light to it and we can actually do something about human trafficking, and that's what the media actually decides to cover.
Okay. I want to ask you about, you have endorsed President Trump. You did that back in December. A lot of folks think the GOP put you out there this week because they need to connect with suburban women. It's a place where he's lacking and where they've had trouble. CBS has new polling out there now.
So, yeah, you can see that was Shannon Bream's follow-up question about Trump's problems with women. And by the way, if you stay tuned to the end of the program, the final clip I'm going to show you is maybe the cross-examination of the week, other than maybe it went too long, where there's another Republican woman who is apparently trying out to be Trump's vice president, Representative Nancy Mace, where she spent the whole time accusing George Stephanopoulos of shaming her for being a rape victim because he was asking her about being a rape victim who publicly testified about being a rape victim and then endorsing a person who's been found liable for rape. And that's the final clip I'm going to show you. But there you saw another Republican woman supporting Trump, and that's what Shannon Bream decided to ask her about as the follow-up. But did not follow up. She said, well, I clearly said that this woman was trafficked when she was 12 and she was a woman, so that means it happened in the past. Well, actually, if you listen to what Katie Britt said in her State of the Union response, she said that the sex trafficking of this woman started when she was 12, and the greatest cross-examination of her that Shannon Bream never did would have been just playing the like under 2 minutes of her speech where she was talking about this that made it. I mean, the New York Times was actually being a little soft by claiming she was implying this happened during the Biden administration. I mean, there was no way that she wasn't trying to leave that impression, and she certainly didn't make it clear that this wasn't Joe Biden's fault, this terrible story she was telling. And I will prove that now by playing that minute 51 seconds from Senator Katie Britt's response to Biden's State of the Union speech over here.
President Biden inherited the most secure border of all time. But minutes after taking office, he suspended all deportations, he halted construction of the border wall, and he announced a plan to give amnesty to millions. We know that President Biden didn't just create this border crisis, he invited it with 94 executive actions in his first 100 days. When I took office, I took a different approach. I traveled to the Del Rio sector of Texas. That's where I spoke to a woman who shared her story with me. She had been sex trafficked by the cartels starting at the age of 12. She told me not just that she was raped every day, but how many times a day she was raped. The cartels put her on a mattress in a shoebox of a room, and they sent men through that door over and over again for hours and hours on end. We wouldn't be okay with this happening in a third world country. This is the United States of America, and it is past time, in my opinion, that we start acting like it. President Biden's border policies are a disgrace. This crisis is despicable. And the truth is, it is almost entirely preventable.
It's almost entirely preventable, even though the story she told took place during the George W. Bush administration. She also said that we wouldn't accept this if we're happening in a third world country, but this is the United States. And of course, the story she told didn't happen in the United States. That's the place part that Shannon Bream never cross-examined her on. And why Shannon Bream didn't play what she said to refute her really bogus claim that, oh, I made clear that this wasn't something that happened during the Biden administration. Where in that clip I just played did she make clear? I mean, maybe she didn't directly say this happened during the Biden administration. I mean, at least I will give her that. But to say that she made clear it didn't happen during the Biden administration, she didn't strongly imply that this story was Biden's fault. I mean, YouTube, you decide. That's all I can say about that, I guess. So those are the three clips I wanted to start for the introduction. The political comedy, and then the real bizarre Senator Katie Britt response and her bogus claim that she wasn't accusing Biden of being responsible for this woman's sex trafficking horror story. But anyway, I'm now going to move on to the rest of the clips, starting with the news summaries from longest to shortest. And the longest news summary is also Fox News. So we're putting all the Fox News bias right here at the beginning, where you can see the big story out of Biden's State of the Union, as you can see from Shannon Bream and then Lucas Tomlinson, is the backlash against him calling this person who was responsible allegedly for the murder of a nursing student in Georgia, Laken Riley. That was one of the things that happened at the State of the Union that Marjorie Taylor Greene yelled out at the State of the Union, and Biden responded about this whole Laken Riley murder, allegedly by a Venezuelan migrant who Biden called an illegal. And, no person is illegal. I mean, illegal is an adjective, not a noun in this case. There's no such thing as an illegal. Otherwise, does that mean Trump is an illegal president, since this person who allegedly murdered Laken Riley has been convicted of nothing? Convicted of nothing. So how did he do anything illegal more than Trump is an illegal president, an illegal presidential candidate, an illegal person an illegal person who had a security clearance, anyway, an illegal campaigner, or using Fox News's nomenclature, that just makes Trump an illegal. Isn't Trump an illegal? Is he vermin poisoning the blood of our country? But anyway, I'm almost going off on a rant, and I haven't even shown the Fox News Sunday news summary. First, Lucas Tomlinson talking about the backlash to Biden's State of the Union speech. And then they have a new reporter on the border, Jeff Paul, talking about, they don't call it Biden's border crisis, but that's what they call it all the rest of the week on Fox News. And it's definitely in the subtext that I'll talk about a little more after we watch that longest and worst, most biased news summary from Fox News Sunday yesterday, together over here.
Hello from Fox News in Washington. The general election is in full swing. President Biden and former President Donald Trump trading blows and digging in for the long, tough campaign ahead. The border crisis front and center for both candidates as two major stories play out. In Georgia, President Trump meeting with the parents of Laken Riley, the 22-year-old nursing student brutally murdered on the University of Georgia campus. A Venezuelan man in the country illegally now charged with her murder. In an interview this weekend, President Biden apologizing a second time for referring to the suspect as, quote, an illegal at the State of the Union, but not mentioning Riley's name at his campaign stop in Atlanta. We're also learning new details about Friday's deadly National Guard helicopter crash near the Texas border, known to be a high-traffic area for drug cartel smugglers. Army investigators are on the scene of the crash. In a moment, Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg joins us, the secretary helping the president make a case for a second term. But first, Fox News team coverage with Jeff Paul covering the border crash from Eagle Pass, and Lucas Tomlinson live from the White House, where we begin. Hello, Lucas.
Hello, Shannon. That's right. The two presidential frontrunners just 70 miles apart in Georgia, Donald Trump in Rome and President Biden in Atlanta.
We all know Donald Trump sees a different America. An American story of resentment, revenge, and retribution. That's not me, that's not you.
After not mentioning his opponent by name in the State of the Union address, a different tone in Georgia. Biden called the suspected killer of Laken Riley an illegal in the speech. He doubled down a day later and then reversed himself in a new interview.
An undocumented person. And I shouldn't have used illegal, it's undocumented.
So you regret using that word?
Yes.
Donald Trump calling out Biden for the about face after pressure from progressive members of his own party.
They just told me prior to what I'm doing right now that Joe Biden went on television and apologized for calling Laken's murderer an illegal. He said he should have called him an undocumented, not an illegal. And Biden should be apologizing for apologizing to this killer.
Before taking the stage, Trump met with the family of Laken Riley in Rome, Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene's home district, who demanded Biden say Riley's name during the State of the Union address.
Neither Trump nor Biden mentioned the crash of that National Guard helicopter in Texas. In his statement, President Biden offered condolences to the family. Shannon?
Lucas Tomlinson at the White House. Thank you very much, Lucas. We turn now to Fox News correspondent Jeff Paul live from the southern border in Texas with more on that. Hello, Jeff.
Good morning, Shannon. Yes, the U.S. military saying the crew on board that helicopter was conducting a federal operation here at the U.S.-Mexico border when it crashed in the Rio Grande Valley. 3 were killed, 1 was injured, and now investigators are trying to figure out how it all happened. In an empty field in the Texas border town of La Grula sits the wreckage of a UH-72 Lakota helicopter that was carrying 3 U.S. National Guard soldiers and 1 U.S. Border Patrol agent. National Border Patrol Council's Chris Cabrera says they were on routine patrol Friday afternoon when the aircraft went down.
I think they were tracking some people that had crossed, some illegal aliens that had crossed into the country. So they were in the process of looking for them. They had some type of mechanical difficulty, went down in a hard landing.
The crew was conducting a federal support mission at the border and was not related to Texas's ongoing Operation Lone Star.
What happened yesterday is a tragedy.
Former acting ICE Director Tom Homan says Border Patrol agents often fly with National Guard to serve as spotters, helping guide soldiers on border mission.
These men and women put it on the line every day. So for the men and women of the Border Patrol, God bless them. And I hope every American understands the difficult job they have.
In border towns like Eagle Pass, the migrant crisis remains front and center. Large groups are still crossing the Rio Grande, and miles north of the border, police are busy tracking down suspected human smugglers. They are scenes that are all too familiar to Kinney County Attorney Brent Smith.
See the security threat, but yet we're not doing anything about it. And I don't think American people are going to put up with that.
U.S. Senator John Cornyn of Texas put out a statement calling the crash very sad, but he also added that this is yet another reminder how the Biden administration and its policies is making the border less safe for everyone. Shannon?
Jeff Paul reporting from the southern border. Thank you very much. Joining us now, Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg.
And Pete Buttigieg was on several programs, so I don't have a clip of that, just because I'm showing you a bunch of senators and then a Representative Nancy Mace at the end with her big battle with George Stephanopoulos. Stay tuned for that. Clip 12. It's almost 7 minutes long, and it's brutal, and it's one of the things where you have to decide who. I obviously think George Stephanopoulos was in the right. Maybe he dragged it on too long, but anyway, I pretty much pre-criticized that clip, although I also wanted to say that they showed clips of the battle between Biden and Trump in their dueling Georgia rallies. They didn't show Trump making fun of Biden's stutter, which you'll see in a couple of the other news summaries. Not the ABC This Week with George Stephanopoulos one, but then the next two, which talk about the dueling Georgia rallies that Biden and Trump held, actually do show that clip, which I think is important to show, just to remind everyone what an asshole Trump is. As well, anyway, not that my regular viewers have forgotten that, but maybe some people who haven't been watching Trump and his speeches as much as the news junkies like us have been watching. Or anyway, that's my criticism of the ABC This Week with George Stephanopoulos news summary, with George Stephanopoulos and then their reporter Selina Wang talking about the first rematch between a president and the president he defeated in more than a century, and then the dueling rallies over in this clip.
Good morning and welcome to This Week. It's the first rematch between a president and the president he defeated in more than a century. And it's a rematch that few voters seem to want. Our new ABC News Ipsos poll shows a majority of Americans have unfavorable impressions of both candidates, and a three-way tie on who Americans trust to do a better job leading the U.S., with 30% saying neither. Biden and Trump held dueling rallies in the battleground state of Georgia on Saturday. That's where we begin with senior White House correspondent Selina Wang. Good morning, Selina.
Hey, George, good morning to you. That's right. We may be 8 months away from Election Day, but those dueling rallies held here last night shows we're already barreling towards the general election. That Biden-Trump rematch has officially kicked off. In Georgia last night, President Biden and Donald Trump going head-to-head.
Hello, Georgia.
Both Biden and Trump now focusing their campaigns on November.
Our freedoms are literally on the ballot this November. Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans are trying to take our freedoms away. But guess what? We're not going to let them take them away.
But if you're a disillusioned Democrat, of which there are many today, I extend an open hand, an open invitation, and I ask you to join us on the noble quest of saving our country.
Trump, who's days away from becoming the GOP nominee for the third time, rallying in a state where he faces criminal charges for his alleged efforts to overturn the results of the 2020 election, which he denies. Trump once again made false claims about the 2020 election and repeated his attacks on E. Jean Carroll, despite a jury's more than $83 million defamation verdict against him. But that didn't bother the voters we spoke to in Rome, Georgia, part of the conservative district of Marjorie Taylor Greene.
And would you still support Trump if he were convicted of a crime?
I would. I would say that it would depend on the crime and on the validity of the crime.
Some 70 miles away in Atlanta, Biden repeating his warning that Trump is a threat to democracy.
When he says he wants to be a dictator, I believe him.
The president looking to build off of any momentum from his State of the Union address.
My purpose tonight is to wake up the Congress and alert the American people that this is no ordinary moment either.
Voters we spoke to split on if that performance was enough.
Did his speech ease any of your concerns around age?
Last night, yeah, I would say it did, because he seemed like he was focusing on the teleprompters. He didn't stray off and lose his thoughts.
I think he put up an act. You know, he's trying to show everybody he's capable. He's not capable. That's the thing.
While the president addressed his age on Thursday night.
I know it may not look like it, but I've been around a while.
The Biden campaign now further trying to alleviate concerns that the president's age is a liability, instead pitching it as an advantage in a new $30 million ad blitz.
Look, I'm not a young guy. That's no secret. But here's the deal. I understand how to get things done for the American people.
Last night's split screen proves just how critical the state will be. Back in 2020, Biden only beat Trump by a margin of less than 12,000 votes. Now, look, the Biden campaign tells me they know how close this race is going to be. The president, after his travels to Pennsylvania and here in Georgia, he's heading to Wisconsin and Michigan this week. The president ramping up the fight in those key battleground states. George?
Selina Wang, thanks. We're joined now by former presidential candidate, current Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg. Mr. Secretary.
Pete Buttigieg, I believe he said. Pete Buttigieg. Well, anyone can have a slip of the tongue. I guess calling him Buttigieg isn't the worst slip that you could possibly make. But like I said, I don't have any clips of Pete Buttigieg. If you want to watch the entire program, I put links under sources in the video description where you can see all the programs. A couple of them are available. The whole episode is free on YouTube. Face the Nation and Meet the Press. The whole thing's free on YouTube. It links down in the video description. Otherwise, you might have to go through some rigmarole where you create an account or have to give your cable provider. If you have a cable, I have a cable provider. That's why I can bring these clips to you. Anyway, I'm not going to go into my whole process, but I thought that was a pretty good news summary. I mean, they did talk about a lot of the negative things that Trump said, the lies he told. They just didn't show him making fun of Biden's stutter, which I think is like a lot more understandable by a lot more people as like what an asshole Trump is, as I was saying. And the next two news summaries do include that, starting with NBC News Meet the Press, where we have Kristen Welker giving the news summary about the general election race for U.S. president officially started, and then the dueling rallies in Georgia after the Biden State of the Union speech. And I think you do hear what an asshole Trump is over in this clip.
Sunday morning, the general election race for the White House has officially started this week. And on Saturday, President Biden and former President Trump faced off in battleground Georgia, a state Mr. Biden won in 2020 by fewer than 12,000 votes. Mr. Biden wasted no time taking aim at the former president, including for hosting Hungarian autocrat Viktor Orban at his Mar-a-Lago club on Friday.
Here's a guy who's kicking off his general election campaign on the road up with Marjorie Taylor Greene. He can tell you a lot about a person who he keeps company with. And yesterday, he was hosting at his club Viktor Orban, who says he doesn't think democracy works. When he says he wants to be a dictator, I believe him.
And new this morning, NBC News is first to report that Biden's reelection effort brought in $10 million in the 24 hours following his State of the Union address, a record haul for his campaign. The Biden team is leaning into its early cash edge against former President Trump, launching a new ad that takes on the issue of his age directly while contrasting his record with Mr. Trump's.
Look, I'm not a young guy. That's no secret. But here's the deal. I understand how to get things done for the American people. Donald Trump believes the job of the president is to take care of Donald Trump. I believe the job of the president is to fight for you, the American people, and that's what I'm doing.
The ad is the first in a $30 million blitz that will target key battleground states over the next 6 weeks. Biden's Georgia visit follows a stop in Pennsylvania on Friday. Next week, he'll barnstorm key states, including New Hampshire, Wisconsin, and Michigan. Vice President Harris was in Arizona and Nevada this weekend, and cabinet secretaries are hitting the road to sell President Biden's agenda as well. 60 miles away from President Biden's event in Atlanta, in Rome, Georgia, former President Trump painted a dark picture of America, calling the press criminals and mocking President Biden for having a stutter.
2 nights ago, we all heard Crooked Joe's angry, dark, hate-filled rant of a State of the Union address. Didn't it bring us together? Remember, he said, I'm going to bring the country together. I'm going to bring it together. Everything Joe Biden touches turns everything.
And joining me now is Democratic Senator Raphael Warnock.
Oh, and Senator Raphael Warnock of Georgia was on a couple of the programs as well. He's a senator who I did not take a clip from. You can see the clips I decided to take under media mentioned. I have brief summaries of all 12 clips. We are now more than halfway through. We've shown the first 6 of the 12 clips. And I like the way NBC News cut the Trump rally there with showing what an asshole Trump is, and then his dark vision of America, I guess they were saying. And the next news summary is from CNN State of the Union, Jake Tapper. This is just under a minute, and he manages to point out what an asshole Trump is over in this clip.
Hello, I'm Jake Tapper in Washington, where the State of our Union is trying to get excited for yet another sequel, though this one we can't blame on Hollywood. President Joe Biden and his campaign have been waiting for Americans to tune into the general election rematch between him and Donald Trump. And after this past week, they got their wish. Last night, both men rallied voters in the purple state of Georgia and gave us a preview of what the next 8 months will look like.
Donald Trump sees a different America. An American story of resentment, revenge, and retribution. That's not me, that's not you.
We all heard Crooked Joe's angry, dark, hate-filled rant of a State of the Union address. Didn't it bring us together? Remember, he said, I'm going to bring the country together.
Trump there mocking Joe Biden's stutter. And joining me now is someone who joined President Biden yesterday in Atlanta, Democratic Senator Reverend Raphael Warnock.
And that's another interview of Raphael Warnock. I'm not going to show you because in the clip after next, I'm actually going to show another important moment from the State of the Union address where that follows up on my topic last week about whether Democrats can take some of the advantage away from Republicans on the immigration issue. And that's why I think Fox News is spending so much time on it, trying to make sure the Democrats don't make any headway. But, I mean, the truth is that Republicans rejected one of the best best in terms of what Republicans want, border security bills ever, and the best they would ever be able to get. And anyway, I'll talk about that after I finish the news summaries, but there's only one more news summary, and it's really brief and kind of tendentious. Margaret Brennan on CBS News Face the Nation spent a lot of time on like this critical point in the war between Israel and Hamas, and that was actually something that did come out of the State of the Union. I'm going to show Bernie Sanders talking about that with Margaret Brennan in the second to last clip. But first, here's just how Face the Nation summed up the news in 30 seconds at the beginning of the program over here.
Good morning and welcome to Face the Nation. We are coming off a big week in politics, but there are challenges ahead, particularly with the war between Israel and Hamas reaching a critical point as the holy month of Ramadan begins. And we turn now to that crisis in the Middle East and renewed fears of violence in Jerusalem. I do want to note that we have an extensive bipartisan conversation with the chairs of the Senate Intelligence Committee that will be coming up in a moment, but we're going to begin with Senator Bernie Sanders from Burlington, Vermont.
And I do have a clip of Bernie Sanders talking about how Biden is increasingly turning against Benjamin Netanyahu. He was caught on a hot mic, maybe purposefully, after the State of the Union, saying he was going to have a conversation with Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, and make sure he had it was going to be a come to Jesus moment or a come to Jesus conversation, and he talked to Jonathan Capehart on MSNBC over the weekend and talked about setting like a red line about not invading Rafah or killing so many Palestinian civilians. And I'll show Bernie Sanders talking about that in a few more clips. But first I want to, having finished the news summaries, I want to show two clips about reaction to the State of the Union and what Biden said, trying to capitalize on the topic I was talking about last week, where Biden went to the border and Trump went to the border, and Biden's trying to show that he was ready to sign this bipartisan Senate border security bill that was the best the Republicans were ever going to do on their agenda, and then Donald Trump told them not to do it, and the Republicans all changed their mind, and it was actually negotiated by a conservative Republican from Oklahoma, James Lankford, and he was seen at the State of the Union when Biden was talking about all the increased border security this bill would have brought. He was seen mouthing, "That's true." And he was over on CNN's State of the Union, and Jake Tapper asked him about that. And he actually did like a better job of cleaning up his big switcheroo than I think Lindsey Graham did in the clip I'm going to show next. By the way, one of the conservative senators who was supposedly in favor of that bipartisan immigration bill in the Senate and then changed her mind when Trump said so, Senator Katie Britt of Alabama, didn't get asked about that on Fox News Sunday, of course. But let me show you how Jake Tapper did his cross-examination, and James Lankford, I think, kind of held his own there and got away with saying a few things that aren't really true that Jake Tapper didn't follow up on over here.
That bipartisan bill would hire 1,500 more security agents and officers, 100 more immigration judges to help tackle the backload of 2 million cases, 4,300 more asylum officers, and new policies so they can resolve cases in 6 months instead of 6 years now.
Our next guest, you can see him there agreeing with President Biden on the factual assertions he was making about the bill. Biden brought up that failed bipartisan border deal during his State of the Union. He joins us now, one of the authors of the deal, Republican Senator James Lankford of Oklahoma. Senator, thanks so much for joining us. So viewers could see you saying that's true, as the president talked about the different hires that would have been possible with that legislation. What were you thinking in that moment?
Yeah, it was interesting. I was listening to the president, obviously, as he was walking through, and I could hear some of my colleagues around me saying none of that's true. And I was actually listening to the president and said, no, that part actually is true. It would have hired all those additional agents. It would have expedited the process. It would have also changed the asylum standard so we can go through much faster. The only way to be able to solve this problem right now legally is to be able to change the asylum standard and to be able to have much faster hearings. The problem is the president also left out some of the things that he could do. Right now, he's choosing not to do. He has a very open parole system that literally thousands of people a day are coming across and being rapidly paroled. He is not actually doing what's called the last in, first up for hearings to be able to deter people from coming across by having faster hearings in the process. So there are multiple executive actions for whatever reason the president's choosing not to do, but there's also legal authorities that need to be done as well.
You endorsed Donald Trump this week, right after his Super Tuesday win in the Oklahoma primary, among others. Was it at all difficult to support Donald Trump after he essentially was responsible for killing your legislation? He smeared the bill. He lied about the bill, legislation you worked hard on, and you believe would not only improve the situation at the border, would maybe even save lives. Did you have any compunctions about it?
Yeah, it is frustrating because there's so much misinformation that came out. But supporting Donald Trump against Joe Biden at this point, seeing the two sets of policies could not be more stark, where we have the highest number of illegal crossings under President Trump was less than 1 million. We're now pushing 3 million with President Biden. To see the way that President Trump enforced the border and worked on national security versus how President Biden, under the exact same set of laws, is actually doing that. There's just no contest between the two of which one's more focused on national security issues, which one's more focused on actually securing the border. So there's no contest between the two. Obviously, President Trump is running for president right now. He wants this to be able to stay a major focus during the course of the rest of the year so people can see the stark contrast of that. My focus is, and the reason I'm continuing to be able to work on a bill and legislation right now is no matter who is president this year, next year, or 10 years from now, we do have gaps in our asylum law that need to be fixed. So no matter who is president, that can actually be resolved and we can have a faster resolution to be able to secure the nation.
Do you have any real hope for any serious border legislation? I understand your point about President Biden and executive action, but this looked like the best chance for a conservative, at least conservative-leaning border bill, and Republicans in the House wouldn't take yes for an answer. They demanded that it include remain in Mexico and other things that you weren't able to get in your negotiation, and so Republicans in the Senate wouldn't even vote on it. I mean, is there really any hope?
All right. I don't think there's any hope in this year on trying to be able to move real action that would really make a difference on the border like what this bill was. Interestingly enough, you mentioned the Remain in Mexico piece. It was actually protected. President Biden could do Remain in Mexico right now. In fact, a court has ordered him to leave that process in place. So that process is in place. That policy could be actually implemented right now. Again, that's one of the executive actions that President Biden chooses not to be able to enforce. There are a lot of things he could do. As I've reminded the president and his team, President Obama enforce the border much better than President Biden did with the exact same set of laws. If President Biden doesn't want to enforce it the way President Trump did, at least enforce it like President Obama did. President Obama, his high years were about 500,000 people. Again, we're at 3 million people under President Biden. If President Biden would just enforce it the same way President Obama did or President Trump did, this would be a very different border and a very different situation in cities like New York and Chicago and Denver and all over the country where they are crying out for the president to enforce the law.
President Biden announced that the U.S. military will be building a new temporary pier off the coast of Gaza.
So Jake Tapper there let Senator James Lankford get away with saying that Biden could reinstate and remain in Mexico, even though remain in Mexico requires Mexico to consent to taking back all of these asylum seekers, and Mexico, at least currently, says they oppose a restart of the Remain in Mexico policy. So what James Lankford said there was false, and Jake Tapper didn't really follow up on it. He did at least say that it was something that the Senate wouldn't, like, you couldn't get votes in the Senate to pass a bill that somehow advocated for Remain in Mexico, despite Mexico having to also agree to it. But that's actually better than what happens, or fairly similar to what happens in the NBC News Meet the Press cross-examination of Senator Lindsey Graham by the host, Kristen Welker. And I don't think that Lindsey Graham does as good a job as, James Lankford admitted that he did say, that's true, because he heard his Republican colleagues around him saying, oh, the bill didn't have that stuff, but it did. And Jake Tapper, to his credit, followed up with, aren't you frustrated that Trump killed your bill? And he talked about the misinformation, but then he pivoted to attacking Biden and saying Trump was better than Biden on immigration and the border, and didn't get a good enough cross-examination, I don't think, from Jake Tapper. And Kristen Welker also lets Lindsey Graham get away with saying, oh, well, not enough parole authority. But, Lindsey Graham, I think, also doesn't really explain his big flip-flop that Kristen Welker points out with a clip of Lindsey Graham just back a few months ago being in favor of the bill, and now he opposed it when Trump said, when Trump says to Lindsey Graham, jump, he says, how high? And could be better cross-examined by Kristen Welker on that point over in this clip.
Let me move to the border now, another area where former President Trump has had an influence. There was a deal that came together in the Senate, never got an actual vote. You were very supportive of it initially. Here's what you said about it in January.
This is the best chance I've seen since I've been up here to have true border security reform. To those who think that if President Trump wins, which I hope he does, that we can get a better deal, you won't.
In his State of the Union address, President Biden accused Trump of effectively playing politics and derailing this deal. Is he right, Senator? You really supported this and then turned against it.
Well, there was no real parole reform. The man who killed Laken Riley was paroled in the United States. He came from Venezuela. So President Biden is apologizing for calling him an illegal immigrant, the alleged murderer. President Trump went to Georgia to meet with the family of Miss Riley to apologize for a country that allowed the killer to get in. So I voted against the bill because it was insufficient on parole, but there will be border security attached to the loan idea.
Yeah, a couple of things. I mean, President Biden said that the term that is now used is undocumented. But let me just get back to this.
Which really pisses me off.
Senator, let me just get back to this deal, though, because the Border Security Union endorsed this bill. Isn't something better than nothing given the crisis that you are talking about?
Good question. They also endorsed my idea, have a break glass moment at 5,000. When you get to 5,000 a day, you shut down the border. The Border Patrol Union said 1,000 a day is a crisis, 5,000 is a disaster. So the bill can be made better. There will be a bill. Remain in Mexico is the key. The Border Patrol told me that if you go back to Remain in Mexico, 70% of it goes away. I think the House will pass the Remain in Mexico bill.
But you know better than I do. Remain in Mexico is dead on arrival in the Senate.
No, it's not.
Well, that, at this current point in time, doesn't seem to have the votes in the Senate. Let's move on to something that happened this weekend at Mar-a-Lago on Friday.
And then Kristen Welker asks Senator Lindsey Graham about Donald Trump meeting with Viktor Orban, the illiberal head of Hungary, and him praising him for being basically like an anti-democratic strongman of where he's really cracked down on the press. And I mean, he was democratically elected, but he's kind of subverting democracy, so he's kind of Trump's model. And by the way, I put a link down in the video description under sources to the entire Meet the Press program, uploaded free on YouTube on the NBC News channel, so you can watch the rest of that interview later if you want to. But Kristen Welker did cross-examine Lindsey Graham on Remain in Mexico being dead on arrival in the Senate, but not so much the fact that Mexico has to agree to take the people back, and Mexico is saying they don't want to do Remain in Mexico anymore. So that's also a barrier to a policy that requires the consent of, our next door neighbor, sovereign government. So I would criticize Kristen Welker for that part of the cross-examination. Now I'm going to move on to the Israel versus Hamas war and the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. The lack of food there is leading possibly to mass starvation. Hundreds of thousands of children are going to die of starvation if more food and other supplies don't get into Gaza. One of the things Biden talked about in the State of the Union was this pier that the United States is going to build on the coast of Gaza to start bringing supplies in, but that's going to take a couple months, and things are really bad, and there's a growing split between Biden and Benjamin Netanyahu, where Biden made it sound like he might not give offensive weapons. You know, when he talked to Jonathan Capehart on MSNBC this weekend, he said that, you know, he wouldn't stop them from their Iron Dome supplies and defensive weapons, but they might somehow start putting some sort of restrictions on offensive weapons, or I don't know exactly what's going to happen, but Senator Bernie Sanders had a good idea of how he thinks the Biden administration should be treating this humanitarian crisis, and he talked to Margaret Brennan about that at the beginning of Face the Nation yesterday, and I'll talk about that clip with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
You have long been a critic of Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The other night, President Biden was heard on a hot mic after the State of the Union address saying he has to have a come-to-Jesus talk with Netanyahu about letting humanitarian aid into Gaza. Have you spoken to President Biden about whether he's had this conversation? If he hasn't, what is he waiting for? And if he already had it, has it made any difference?
Well, I've spoken to people very high up in his administration. Here's the bottom line. Margaret, what we are seeing in Gaza today is literally an unprecedented crisis. It's not just that 30,000 people, 2/3 of them are women and children, have already been killed. We are looking at the possibility of hundreds of thousands of children starving to death. The United States of America cannot be complicit in this mass slaughter of children. So it is one thing to talk to Netanyahu, to pressure Netanyahu, but here is the bottom line. Year after year, we have provided billions of dollars in military aid to the government of Israel. Right now, you have a right-wing extremist government under Netanyahu. There are plans to provide him with another $10 billion in unfettered military aid. Well, you can't say to Netanyahu, stop the slaughter, allow the massive amounts of humanitarian aid that we need to come in to feed the children. Please, please, please. Oh, but by the way, if you don't do it, here's another $10 billion to continue the war. Now, we have written a letter to the president. It turns out that Israel is in violation of the law. Stopping American humanitarian aid is in violation of the law. That should be clear. No more money to Netanyahu's war machine to kill Palestinian children.
You've said Israel's in violation of the Foreign Assistance Act, as have a handful of other Democratic senators. They may also be in violation of the Leahy Act. The president himself has the national security powers to suspend. Do you really think, though, in a presidential election year, that the president of the United States would halt or pause or condition aid to one of the closest allies in the Middle East?
Well, I think it is the right thing to do. You can't beg Netanyahu. You got to tell him, if you want any money, you got to change your policy. Allow the trucks to come in to feed the children. And by the way, in terms of politics, which is secondary to my mind in this issue, the truth is, whether you're a conservative Republican or a progressive, you do not want to see children in Palestine starve to death. So I think it's good politics, and it's the moral and right thing to do.
Yeah, I mean, Senator Bernie Sanders makes a pretty good argument that it's both good politics and the moral and right thing to do to stop hundreds of thousands of children from starving to death in Gaza because the food supplies have gotten so low. As to where that's going to develop, one of the things that Biden seemed to imply in his conversation with Jonathan Capehart on MSNBC over the weekend, and Jonathan Capehart pointed this out multiple times in his appearances afterwards, was that Biden seemed to not want to talk about the possibility that he might address the Israeli Knesset at the invitation of the president of Israel, who is not the prime minister, Benjamin Netanyahu. The president is more a ceremonial figure. And the thing is, Netanyahu does not have strong political support in Israel. And I mean, it may be time for the Biden administration to do more to split the Netanyahu coalition. And I mean, that's the problem with Israel. Isn't so much Israel itself is the problem in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It's Benjamin Netanyahu and his policies and Likud, as much as it is Hamas on the Palestinian side. They're like the two biggest obstacles to end to the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians are the current Israeli government and the current Gaza government, Hamas. If we could bypass the worst of both political systems, such as they are, I guess maybe a solution would be more tenable. I don't know if that's something that Biden can help facilitate before the November election, but as Bernie Sanders was saying, it's not so much what is politically necessary, it's more like what is the moral right thing to do, and that's the moral right thing to do. Anyway, I've kind of gone off on a tangent there, and I still have one more major clip to show you, and I don't know if this is the cross-examination of the week, or does this just go on too long, where like George Stephanopoulos should have like opted out of this argument about 3 minutes earlier, because this is like 6 minutes 44 seconds where George Stephanopoulos tries to get Representative Nancy Mace, who may or may not be trying out to be Donald Trump's vice president. She, before, when she was running for Congress, she gave this testimony about how she was a rape victim. And George Stephanopoulos starts off this clip showing her testimony, saying that it was courageous, not shaming her, certainly, and then asking her, well, how can you support Donald Trump then when he's been found liable for defamation and sexual abuse, that the judge in the case, of E. Jean Carroll, and the judge in the case said that it is totally appropriate to call what he did rape, because even though New York state law has like a very strict definition of rape, that doesn't apply to what happened to E. Jean Carroll necessarily, and that's why Trump wasn't found liable for rape under New York law. The judge said, well, digitally penetrating someone is what, you can call that rape colloquially if that's something you want to do. And anyway, it got into, here is like almost 7 minutes of George Stephanopoulos trying to get Nancy Mace to deal with the contradiction between her public testimony about how rape is bad, but she's also endorsing Donald Trump, who's been found liable by 2 juries, more likely than not. And she doesn't believe the victim. She's kind of attacking the victim, E. Jean Carroll, in her response, but claiming that George Stephanopoulos is shaming her after calling her testimony courageous. At the beginning of the clip, I'll talk about with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
Our next guest is South Carolina Congresswoman Nancy Mace, a Donald Trump supporter who gave candid and courageous testimony about her own experience as a rape victim weeks before launching her run for Congress in 2019.
From some of us who've been raped, it can take 25 years to get up the courage and talk about being a victim of rape. And the first thing that happens when a woman comes out in public and says she's been raped, what is the first thing out of someone's mouth? Is that it didn't happen. This is why women do not come forward. They are afraid.
Congressman, thanks for joining us this morning. You've endorsed Donald Trump for president. Judges and 2 separate juries have found him liable for rape and for defaming the victim of that rape. How do you square your endorsement of Donald Trump with the testimony we just saw?
Well, I will tell you, I was raped at the age of 16. And any rape victim will tell you, I've lived for 30 years with an incredible amount of shame over being raped. I didn't come forward because of that judgment and shame that I felt. And it's a shame that you will never feel, George. And I'm not going to sit here on your show and be asked a question meant to shame me about another potential rape victim. I'm not gonna do that.
It's actually not about shaming you. It's a question about Donald Trump.
No, you are shaming me.
You've endorsed Donald Trump for president.
Right.
Donald Trump has been found liable for rape by a jury. Donald Trump has been found liable for defaming the victim of that rape by a jury. It's been affirmed by a judge.
It was not a criminal court case, number one. Number two, I live with shame. And you're asking me a question about my political choices, trying to shame me as a rape victim, and I find it disgusting. And quite frankly, E. Jean Carroll's comments when she did get the judgment, joking about what she was going to buy, it makes it harder for women to come forward when they make a mockery out of rape, when they joke about it.
Doesn't it make it harder for women to come forward when they are
It makes it harder when other women
candidates?
joke about it, and she's joked about it. I find it offensive. And I also find it offensive that you're trying to shame me with this question.
I'm not trying to shame you at all. In fact,
I have dealt with this for 30 years. You know how hard it was to tell my story 5 years ago when they were doing a fetal heartbeat bill and there were no exceptions for rape, incest, or rape or incest in there? I had to tell my story because no other woman was coming forward. No rape victims were represented. And you're trying to shame me this morning.
I'm just asking.
And I find it offensive, and this is why women won't come forward.
Women won't come forward because they're defamed by those who perpetrate rape. Donald Trump
they are judged and they're shamed, and you're trying to shame me this morning. I think it's disgusting.
I'm not shaming you at all.
I've told my story. It took me 25 years to tell my story. I was judged for it. I still get judged for it today.
I'm asking you a very simple question.
And I answered it. You're shaming me for my political choices.
I'm asking you a question about why you endorse someone who's been found liable for rape.
It was not a criminal court. This was a civil court. It was a civil court. And by the way, she joked about the judgment and what she was going to do with all that money, and I find that offensive.
I'm asking you about the man
But as a rape victim who's been shamed for years now because of her rape, you're trying to shame me again by asking me this political question.
You've repeated that again.
I think it's offensive. As a woman, I find it offensive. In my political choices, I've endorsed the man that I believe is best for our country. It's not Joe Biden. And you looked at the dueling rallies yesterday in Georgia. Laken Riley's family was with Donald Trump. They weren't with Joe Biden. The same guy yesterday that apologized for calling her killer an illegal, who wasn't illegal. And here you are trying to shame a rape victim. I find it disgusting.
I mean, you keep saying I'm shaming you.
You are. The question, it is.
How is the question asking you about a presidential candidate who's been
You're asking a rape victim.
And there's no question about that. And you've courageously talked about that.
Because I've been raped. I think that's disgusting.
No, I'm questioning your political choices because you're supporting someone who's been found liable for rape. Actually, I'm not trying to shame you.
You are. That's exactly what you're doing.
You're not answering the question.
And I think it's disgusting.
Well, you're welcome to say that, but you also have to answer the question. Why are you supporting someone who's been found liable for rape?
I just answered your question.
What is the answer?
He was not found guilty in a criminal court of law. It was sexual abuse. It wasn't actually rape, by the way. And E. Jean Carroll joked about all the money she's going to get and made a mockery out of this case. And I think that's offensive. There's a reason why women don't come forward. And when you have someone who says that they're raped and they make a mockery out of this civil court judgment, it's offensive to other women. It makes it harder for other women to come forward when another woman has made a mockery of it.
You said women don't come forward because they are afraid. They are afraid because
they're judged
defamed
and shamed
by those
like you're trying to shame me this morning.
They are afraid to come forward, as you said, because they are defamed by those who commit the rape. That's what Donald Trump has been found guilty of doing.
He defended himself over that and denies that it ever happened, but he was not found guilty in a criminal court of law. It was a civil judgment.
So is that the distinction you're making?
Abuse.
A civil judgment is okay, but a criminal judgment is not?
This is different, and they didn't even input all of the evidence into the civil case either, because some of the information she provided wasn't even accurate or correct. But to sit here and ask me as a rape victim to try to shame me for my political choices is wrong, and I think it's offensive.
You can repeat that again and again and again.
And I'm going to because I find it deeply offensive.
You don't find it offensive that Donald Trump has been found liable for rape?
I find it offensive as a rape victim that you're trying to shame me for my political choices. And I've said again repeatedly, E. Jean Carroll has made a mockery out of rape by joking about it. I don't find that funny.
Well,
rape is not funny.
You've made it
rape
perfectly
is
clear.
Serious.
You've made it perfectly clear you're
Rape
comfortable.
is serious.
It is
it's
serious.
Not funny, and it shouldn't be made a mockery of. But if you want to defend a woman who made a mockery out of rape, then you go ahead and do that. I'm not going to do that.
Well, actually, what you're doing is defending a man who's been found liable for rape. I don't understand how you can do that.
Not in a criminal court of law. This was a civil judgment over sexual abuse, not rape, by the way, and she made a mockery out of it.
Can we pull up the Washington Post headline right there? In fact, it has been shown to be rape. The judge affirmed that it was, in fact, rape. Donald Trump was found to have committed rape. That's just a fact.
That is a civil judgment, not a criminal court. They're two very different things, and you know better.
Well, I just showed you the facts.
You know better.
You show that you're very comfortable with what Donald Trump has done.
And what you've done is offensive to women who've been raped. What you've done this morning is offensive.
We'll let the viewers decide about that. Let's talk about January 6th.
And then George Stephanopoulos moves on to ask her about how she condemned Trump after January 6th, and now she's endorsing him. But did that cross-examination take too long, or did he spend just the right amount of time, almost 7 minutes, going back and forth on and her attacking him? And I mean, obviously, George Stephanopoulos was not shaming her for being a rape victim. He even called her courageous for her testimony back in 2019, but he was asking about the contradiction about what she said about rape and then supporting someone who's been found liable for rape and defamation. And he even showed the headline from the Washington Post. Judge says, yeah, that's, just because it was digital penetration and that's not rape in New York, you can still say rape, and that's accurate in the colloquial sense as most people mean it or whatever. And actually, that wasn't even all their sparring. I didn't show you the clip from the very end of the interview between George Stephanopoulos and Nancy Mace, where after he asked her about January 6th and she was trying to say what happened wasn't as bad as what she said back in 2021 in the early days, then George Stephanopoulos ends with, so you've made it very clear you're comfortable with Donald Trump being found liable for rape and you're comfortable with his actions on January 6th. And she says, I didn't say I was comfortable. You're putting words in my mouth. I don't know. Is that like a verbal rape? I don't know. But you wouldn't condemn it. No, you're putting words in my mouth. Are you comfortable with it? I support Donald Trump for president. I just endorsed him. So you're comfortable with it? A few weeks ago, even though he's been found liable for rape in a civil judgment, not a criminal court case, you go ahead and keep shaming women who've been raped. Good luck with that. And then Stephanopoulos, thank you for joining me. We'll be right back. Yeah, so in fact, if you want to read the entire transcript, here, let me put that in the live comments. There's the entire transcript of ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. Was that like too much cross-examination? Not enough cross-examination? I mean, he definitely perseverated on that one point for almost 7 minutes and came back to it at the end after the whole January 6th cross-examination. But Representative Nancy Mace, I don't think, did a really good job of explaining the contradiction. I'm just saying, I think maybe George Stephanopoulos spent too much time pointing out the contradiction that was pretty obvious, like in the first 3 minutes, do we need another 4 minutes? Do we need to come back to it at the end? Anyway, you can let me know what you think in the comments section. That was my last Newsmaker clip, and I appreciate all of my live viewers for the live stream who've been keeping me company while I show you the clips. I've been reading your comments along the way, so thanks for joining me there. I also appreciate the people who post comments on the recorded show. I am going to finish up here, but I also I didn't have any live appearances by my cats Cheech and Chong that I adopted last December. Cheech was here right before the show started, but I think they've been engaged elsewhere. But I do have a bonus Cheech and Chong clip for the fans of my two cats. I Are they kittens? I don't know. They were born probably around the beginning of September, so they're a little more than 6 months old. They're getting pretty big, and one of the things they've been doing is they've been destroying this plant that had been successfully growing when we had no pets. In fact, I have here, oh, here's one of the leaves that they like cut off the plant. And I was going to try to get them a picture of them attacking the plant, but instead I just got them in front of the plant, but they were kind of cute. This is from earlier today, my bonus Cheech and Chong clip for the Cheech and Chong fans out there over here. And right at the end there, that was Cheech, who came up to my iPhone and actually licked the iPhone. It didn't really come through in the video, but Cheech actually licked the camera. Cheech is definitely the camera hog involved here. But anyway, thank you for joining me. That's all of my clips and my commentary. I hope you appreciate the time and effort I put into picking out all those clips and adding my media criticism and political commentary. If you want to support my weekly live streams that will continue all the way through January 2025, you can give me a thumbs up. You can subscribe to the channel. When you do that, there's like this little bell you can click on where you get notified whenever I upload a video. And after January 2025, I think I might be just going back to making Fox News bias videos because they're so biased. It would be so much easier to do it than when I used to do it several years ago. So yeah, I think for at least a year or two after I finish my live stream next January, I'm just gonna go back to making Fox News bias videos. Anyway, you can let me know what you think about that too, because I'm all the way here at the end of the live stream or the recorded show. So if you're watching now, you're one of my most loyal, committed viewers, and I thank you for that. And let me know what you think about going back to making Fox News bias videos after January 20th, 2025. And I will be back next Monday and every Monday through January 2025, unless I have some other reason to upload a video. I'll just see you back next Monday for the Monday Media Mix-Up. Thanks for joining me, and until then, or until I have some other reason to upload a video, I guess I will be seeing all of you around the internet.